for the next two talks, we are getting a little bit into implementation again. And I invite to the talk initially Klaus Kirketerp-Møller from Denmark. He's an orthopedic surgeon working at the University of Copenhagen, and since many years one of the few orthopedic surgeons who's a member of the Diabetic Foot Study Group of the European Association of the Study of Diabetes. And not only that, since I guess two years now, he's a board member of the DFSG, and I don't tell too much that he will be the chairman of the group as the first orthopedic surgeon leading this group. Up until now, it was only endocrinologists from next year on. So please give your talk about the update on the Nordic Diabetic Foot project.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, the title of my talk is Update on the Nordic Diabetic Foot. And I guess a lot of you have never heard about it, so disregard of the title, and instead I'll just inform you about the Nordic Diabetic Foot Task Force. The Nordic Diabetic Foot Task Force was is a network bringing together people from international healthcare, clinicians, and a multidisciplinary background, not only doctors, but also podiatrists, nurses, and everyone else with interest and knowledge about the diabetic foot. We want to have a very broad representation and not excluding anyone that have the interest and the knowledge. I would like to share this with you, that we like to invite everyone to participate whenever possible. It was funded at the Nordic Diabetic Foot Symposium during EWMA 2013. It was initiated by Jan Appelqvist, who was the former president of EWMA. And just to show you the logo of the EWMA Conference in Denmark, and I think it's a coincidence, but the logo refers to two fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen. And the right one is the Little Mermaid, and she fell in love with the prince, and she would like to follow him to the ground, but she had no legs. So she consulted a witch, and the witch said, I can give you legs, but the cost is that every step you take will be like a knife cutting through your foot soles. So that represents the diabetic foot. And then the left one is the swan, the little ugly duckling that you might have heard of. And the little ugly duckling was born, it's not born when you come out of an egg, but it was born in a hen's farm, and it was peeled on by all the other birds. But eventually it became a beautiful swan. And maybe this ugly duckling is the Nordic Diabetic Foot Task Force. Now an ugly duckling, perhaps later a very beautiful swan. The network faces an important task of promoting systematic implementation of guidelines for diabetic foot care in the Nordic countries. And by those I mean Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. We have not excluded Iceland, that is actually a member of the Nordic countries. But in this case, we have focused on these 4 countries, and I will just tell you a little bit about that. Even in very developed countries like the Nordic countries, we do not follow systematic guidelines, and this is have great consequences for the patient with the diabetic foot ulcers, and so there is a risk of complications that if we had implemented all these guidelines, we could avoid. So I just made a preliminary survey in Denmark in 2012 and 2013, sorry, and of all the centers that I asked, there was one question: are you a diabetic foot care unit? I did not give any definition of what is diabetic foot care unit. So of all the answers, I got 12 responded, yes, we are a diabetic foot unit. And another question was, which classification system do you use? Well, 1/3 of those did not use any classification system. And some used Wagner, a few used Texas, and Peters was not used, which is not a surprise. But 1/3 of all the centers that call themselves a diabetic foot clinic have not used any classification system for the ulcers. So another question was, does your team include a diabetologist? Again, it's only the centers that actually said yes, that they are diabetic foot unit. And half of them, almost half of them said, yeah, they are part of the team. The other half said, well, they are on call, so we can just get them in. And one, that's actually one, said, well, we never have an endocrinologist in our team. So again, that reflects the discussion from the session before, that maybe we should work a bit more together on these patients. The Nordic countries are shown in this map, and Greenland is a very huge area of Denmark, but it's not a subject for this. So it's the blue countries in the middle you should look at. And normally we consider the Nordic countries for small countries. But just to give you an example, if you take either Norway or Sweden and place their southern tip right here in Madrid, the countries would extend to Strasbourg. So they're very huge and give some problems when you have to implement diabetic foot care for patients living in the remote areas. They are small, these countries, in sense of population. Denmark is the smallest country. We have 5.6 million people. We have a density 130 people per square kilometers. The other countries, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, are very, very different, and they have almost 1/10 of the density of people living in the area. So there's a lot of people living in rural area, very remote, on islands for Norway, or in Sweden, a long way out in the woods, and they cannot see the hospital within an hour, for instance. So we have certain problems in how to do implementation in those countries that look similar but is very different. So what is our strategy? It is to initiate activities at the national level to highlight the gap between the recommended guidelines, as for instance the International Working Group of Diabetic Foot, and actual practice that is, as you have seen, very different. We would like to approach health authorities and policymakers to push further implementation of best practice. And we, at the Diabetic Foot Symposium in Copenhagen, one of the members of the board of the talk said, well, it's very important to have the health authorities with you, not only the health personnel, but also the policymakers. So you need to have those with you in your group. So we're trying to do that. And then we'll host a biennial Nordic Diabetic Foot Symposium that is aimed to promote and support the implementation of the best practice. So this is the organization. We have the steering committee of the Nordic Diabetic Foot Task Force, which I am the chairman of. Then we have the organizing committee of the Nordic Diabetic Foot Symposium, and that is chaired by a Swedish colleague of mine, Magnus Lundahl, that you probably have heard of. And then under this, we have the national working groups that is working independently, but refer to the steering group, the steering committee of the Nordic Diabetic Foot Task Force. Our objective is to have a broad interdisciplinary and geographical representation in each of the Nordic countries. So in Denmark, it would not be a problem to gather people, but that could be a problem in the other Nordic countries, because they have a long way to travel. It would be time-consuming and so forth. But still, it is our aim to do it, to have a broad geographical and interdisciplinary representation in each of the national committees. We want themselves, not the steering committee of the Nordic countries, but themselves to define a strategy for local implementation of the national guidelines. Because of the differences between the countries, although the healthcare system is quite similar, there is some difficulties in just taking one model and implement it in all countries. So we need to have a local strategy for implementation. Then we have to identify and acquire funding for local projects and initiatives, and we have gathered with the CAP partners in order to get funding for that. And then, of course, we need to gather the information and experience in how to do this and how we progress. So we have to monitor what we are doing. And then share and debate experiences between the national working group at meetings, but also at the symposium that will be held every other year. So it's a biannual event with the aim to promote and support systematic implementation of the best practice. We would like to train the clinicians through meet the experts and hands-on sessions. And this is mainly aimed at, there is a huge difference between doctors and podiatrists in how things are learned and how things are done. And handcraft is not something you can read in a book. You need to have training and you need to have hands-on experience. Then we'll have to exchange experience between clinical centers. We are much inspired by the Stefan Moorbach presentation of the German centers, and I think that is an example to follow. And then, of course, we'll debate the overall national status of guideline implementation in each of the Nordic countries. So that could be a kind of a benchmark. How far did you go? No, I got further, Just try to keep us up on the toes. And then, again, coordinate and develop task force and national working groups efforts. So our immediate next steps of action would be to form and start the national working groups almost right now. And then to have a general survey on organization on diabetic foot care in each of the Nordic countries, like I've just told you about, that I did a preliminary. We will do it on all the countries at the same time in order to get a baseline. And then we will publish these findings in the Symposium in 2014. So the Nordic Foot Symposium is held in 5th to 6th November of 2014. We will debate national strategies between the national working groups. And we will lay the tracks for the future progress from there. And I would like to thank you in welcoming you to join us in the symposium, the 5th and 6th November in Malmö of Sweden. And I know there is some flyers at the exit that you can take with you when you go. Thank you very much.